Well, it's wonderful to be here with you today, Mita. Look, you and I have more in common than you might imagine. I mean, firstly, we both are passionate advocates for inclusion in all its shapes and forms, not for political correctness, but it's just the right thing to do. And obviously, It also is a platform for creating a huge amount of value for organizations and obviously value for people as individuals. Having a good boss is a critical element of that. And of course, that is the topic of this conversation. And you're on a mission to change all of this, not just to cope, not just to manage, but actually how to learn from bad bosses. And you've had quite a few. I mean, you haven't been going that long, and you've had in your brilliant and autobiographical book, which I'm showing right now, The Devil Emails at Midnight, What Good Leaders Can Learn from Bad Bosses.
Yes.
You pack full of that, stories, anecdotes, tips. It's hugely practical. It's autobiographical, of course, throughout. I'd be interested to hear what your bosses say of you, but we'll come on to that later. And you have some hilarious and quite sad in many cases shorthands and terms for your bosses. The chopper being one of my favorite ones.
Okay, great.
Mohammed being the one that really irritated me, but we'll talk about that. But what a wonderful book, what a wonderful person.
Thank you so much.
To have you on the show, so welcome.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. And time's a precious commodity. I really appreciate you taking the time to read the book. It means a lot.
Well, likewise. That's a polite nudge already in the episode. Get on with it, David. Get on with it.
No, it's not. I mean that. We are all busy. We're all busy people. So thank you.
I mean, there are quite a few books on bosses and bad bosses, but yours really does stand out in a number of ways. One, you flip the script because you want us to learn from the experience, become better leaders. Tell us a little bit more, just as an opening, as to your framing for this book.
Well, the framing actually started on a personal note. My mother's home was flooded and destroyed a few years ago. It's now been rebuilt and she's happily in her house. But anyone who's been in a soaked home or a home that's been impacted by fire, it's quite traumatic. And here I am in my childhood bedroom trying to save things. I find report cards from elementary school. I find all these writings. I find I was the proud editor-in-chief of my fifth grade, newspaper and all these things you hold on to. And I found a notebook. Anyone who knows me today, I still love a notebook. If you ask me, what's my technology? How am I writing? Yes, I'm using AI, but I love a good notebook. I found a notebook from my 20s and I had written down a list of my bad bosses and little vignettes on them. And I had this moment where I thought, wow, I can't believe I wrote this and kept this, but what if I'm in someone's notebook? It's like the Mean Girls burn book moment. I could be in someone's notebook. And if you followed my writing, I do talk about how to survive the toxic workplace, how to survive the bad boss. But what if we are the bad boss? What if we have a behavior that is either causing hurt and harm or just irritating people, or at the end of the day, because of something I'm unknowingly doing or knowingly doing, I am not getting the best out of my team and people. And so that was really how I wanted to flip the script for this book.
Wonderful. Of course, being subject to a bad boss and all the feelings, emotions, and harm that comes with it is a very subjective and very personal thing. But of all of the harms, which would be the ones you pick out as you think, gosh, that's right at the top of the list of being a bad boss?
Wow. Yes. Well, in The Devil Emails at Midnight, I go through 13 archetypes. I include myself in that. The one that I still can't get over is the boss who yells and screams, bullies, intimidates, publicly humiliates, degrades the team. And I, up until the point when I had worked for Medusa, who I nickname as one of my former bosses in the beauty industry, I had never had anyone scream or yell at me. Not my parents, not my husband, not my brother, not my friends. I didn't tolerate that in my personal life, nor did anyone treat me that way. And then I show up at work and it's not just happening to me, but others around her, and people make excuses for the behavior. It's okay. And that to me is the one I still can't wrap my head around, that you can still be kind and drive results. You can still be kind and fair. You can still be kind and firm. And that, I think, is really still lacking in our workplaces, kindness.
Yeah. It's sort of considered soft, isn't it? It's like you can't, it's like you can't be kind and have high performance, whereas actually you absolutely can.
You can.
I mean, in that case, in the Medusa case or the other ones you mentioned, did you ever get behind what was going on? did you actually have an interest, or were you just in the mindset of, God, I've either got to cope with this, manage this, or get out? What's really going on with them to drive this sort of awful behavior?
I think I'm in a place now, as I researched and wrote the book and reflected on it. I have empathy for bad bosses. I've been a bad boss, and sometimes we are misdirected human beings who are causing hurt and harm, because what's the saying? Hurt people hurt people. But I think when you're in it, it's quite difficult, right? When you are the target of this behavior. And I think depending on the level of the behavior, you could approach your boss to give and receive feedback. And we can talk about that if you have a safe relationship to do so. But at the end of the day, I've come to realize that I can't change someone else's behavior. I can only change myself, right? And so,
Uh-huh.
how much of myself do I want to sacrifice in this situation versus learning, moving on, and getting
Yeah.
out?
That's a really important point you just made. That's quite profound, because I think some people do think that they can change
Mhm.
the tone, the voice, the actions. So I guess in a sense of, look, if I work with them enough, they will learn, adapt to me. You don't buy that at all?
Listen, I think we talk about a bad boss to a good leader. If I'm striving to be a good leader, part of my job is to adapt to my team's work style or meet them in the middle. I think meeting them in the middle. I'm not going to go exactly all the way over to how you work, and you're not going to exactly become a mini me. But I do
Yeah.
think that's the job of a good leader, is to think about how do you get the best out of your people.
Yeah. You also made a very important point, maybe controversial point, but a good point around, you think leaders are, sort of bad bosses are made,
Mm,
not born. And I was intrigued by that. I mean, I buy it to a degree. And then I
mm,
thought, hang on, but what if they've grown up through whatever their childhood trauma, genetics, with actually some deep personality flaws, and whether it's anxiety, some
mm,
degrees of narcissism, and
yes.
everything that means. I just wondered, how much of it is actually nature versus nurture.
That's a great question. From what I've experienced and studied and researched, I think that there are three moments where bad boss behaviors will come out in the workplace. One, an obvious one, is external factors. Something's happening in the marketplace, your
Mm.
competitions beat you on an innovation, a merger and acquisition fails, all the things that we can think about and how that might cause stress on me as a boss. Second would be this idea around, in my house, we say poo poo trickles down. If my boss is
Beautiful.
experiencing a lot of stress, that's going to fall on me, right? And
Yes.
so that,
Yeah.
and then the third would be things that are happening in our personal life, which we don't talk enough about, which we bring into the workplace: a loss of a loved one, a divorce, empty nesting, struggling with raising children, taking care of elderly relatives, all of these
Yes.
things.
Yes.
And we bring that into work. And that also is generating this behavior. Now, I've also been guilty. We all have things that we've struggled with in our childhood, and sometimes we bring into the workplace. And
Mm.
those are things we can work on. But I would also say, if you're working in a positive workplace, hopefully it helps you bring out the best in you and not the
Mm.
worst in you.
Who says the poo poo quote in your household?
Oh, we do. We just don't use the S word.
Very good. Very good.
Around my
Very
children.
good.
It's hard. It's hard raising kind and inclusive kids. That's the hardest
Yeah.
thing I'm
Tell
doing
me
right
about
now.
it. Tell me
Yeah.
about it. The word bad
Mm,
is again a subject. How do you? There's obvious examples where it's bad, where you just feel it's just awful. You're in tears. You think it's horrendous. There's toxicity. That's sort of an extreme of bad
mm,
bosses. The boss shouting at you, as you mentioned. There's a continuum, and I just wondered, how do you judge in that moment whether something's bad? And the reason I ask that is,
mm,
I look back as part of my own research into reading your book, looking at your work, and reflecting on. I hadn't quite got the diary, reflecting on my own 30 years of working and so on. There were some bosses that were not
mm,
horrendous,
mm,
but at the time I didn't like them. But then years later, I thought, well, perhaps they had a point. Perhaps it was my issue rather than them being a bad
mm.
boss. So just the question I have is around, how do you judge when you are at the margins whether somebody's a good or bad boss?
I love that question. It is a spectrum, it's a continuum. I can go from being a good leader to a bad boss, from being a bad boss to a good leader. Somebody who's a bad boss for me might be a great boss for you. Someone who I
Yes,
consider to
yes,
be micromanaging, like the chopper, as you mentioned, who I
yeah,
who I include in the devil emails at midnight, might be a great boss for you because you might actually need that level of micromanagement. And I think sometimes, when you're more junior in your career starting out and you have expectations of what the workplace will be, yeah, I've been quick to label people bad bosses, of course. I have one boss I remember early on in my career. And at the moment, I don't know if I thought he was bad, tough, difficult, didn't enjoy working for him. And here's what he was teaching me. Anytime I would go to him with a 10-page slide, deck, proposal, he would immediately flip through every slide. And guess what he would do? He would only look at the titles. He wouldn't even look at the content of the slide, which drove me crazy. And he would say, this slide just says the innovation launched in 2025. Well, what did the innovation do? How much did it sell? What did we learn from it? And he taught me a very important lesson. He said, most executives are not going to actually look at the contents of the slide. They're going to look at the title. Yes, they're going to want the takeaway. What is the story you're trying to tell? And I tell you, I go back to him like day after day. And he'd mark it up and flip it back to me and say, what is the takeaway of each slide? And that was the biggest gift I got. But see, here's the difference. He wasn't micromanaging. He didn't redo the deck and give it to me. He didn't give me the answers. That is coaching, teaching, and training. He had high standards, but he explained to me why those standards were high. He was explaining to me the art of storytelling with data in the business world, which to this day has served me so well. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm interested in warning signs. And you say that we, and I quote, we all have the capability, the potential, the possibility of being a bad boss. So if you're listening or watching this podcast and you are a boss, or you think you're a boss, think, you know what, I'm not sure I'm doing that well. What are the warning signs? You're maybe on the edge. What are the warning signs you should be looking out for if you think you might be, tipping over that edge to becoming a bad boss in at least some people's eyes?
I would go back to the three factors we talked about. External, your own boss, something's happening in your personal life. If we self-reflect and pause enough and sit in silence with ourselves, which is not easy, you start to uncover the things about yourself that can actually tip to bad boss behavior. What is my behavior? It's micromanagement. Always has been, always will be. And so I know if these three things might be happening that could be affecting me, I have to watch for when I might be feeling a loss of a sense of control. And where can I look for that control? If I have power at work, the easiest place is with my team. And so watch for that in terms of what is happening in your life. And most people, and I say, as I say in The Devil Emails at Midnight, this book is not for the baddest of the bad bosses, the worst of the worst, the people who have made headlines, the people who have caused so much hurt and harm. They don't need executive coaching. They need therapy, right? This is not for them. But what I would say is, I think we all know when we are irritated, defensive, disengaged. Emotions are swinging, very sad, very angry. What is going on? Right. And if we sit with ourselves, we probably can find that root cause. But it is the power of silence, and it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to sit with yourself and have a conversation with yourself to say, why am I acting this way at work? And you asked about signs. The other thing is, how are people reacting to you?
Yes.
If I walk into meetings repeatedly and the most engaged people, and listen, I am a much more in my career have been a quiet, introverted leader. I engage in different ways, but if the ways in which people engage no longer hold true, what's going on? People seem anxious around you. They seem disengaged. They seem withdrawn. They're not responding to your emails. They don't show up to meetings. Like, what's happening? Like, the signs are there. And oh, by the way, and this has happened to me, exit interview data. Do we even do exit interviews, or are they canceled? I don't know. But if your company is doing exit interviews and an employee actually shares the truth, it's there in writing. And so many of us actually don't look at it. We ignore it, or we don't even do them.
Yeah, it's too uncomfortable. So there's the inner work, there's the reflective work, and then there's sort of looking around you and sensing and feeling and reading what people are actually doing and reacting to what you say. So imagine you are in a situation where you're speaking with a new boss, say all the way to the top, new CEO, chair of an organization, and she or he says, I haven't been the greatest in the past. I'm, I've had a moment of wonderment, and I've gone on a sabbatical. Whatever I've done,
Sure.
I've turned a page, turned a corner, and I want to be a much, much better boss. What would be on your shopping list of things you'd encourage them to do,
Mm.
inspired by the research in your book and your own experience on and how to be a really good leader?
Mm.
What would be
I
at the
love
top
that
of the list?
question. What a great question. I would say start with vulnerability and what is the thing that you've discovered you need to work on? Not the 10
Mm,
things, but are you willing to talk to people about that? Right? Are you willing to talk to people about that? And
right.
second, to then go to your team and to say, and I like to do this in writing, and I'll tell you why. So if I'm working with someone on my team, I might write a note and says, I'm excited to meet with you on Friday. I would love to get some coaching from you on the following thing I'm working on. I believe I need to do a faster job of delegating when projects are kicked off. And I need to do a better job of teaching and not fixing mistakes. I'd love your coaching on that. Notice I'm using the word coaching and not feedback.
Yeah.
Sometimes feedback can seem daunting. It seems sort of final, like it's
Yeah.
either a yes or a no, it's black or white.
Mm, mm,
And if you say coaching, why can't we be coaching each other? And if I put that in writing, that person then has time to absorb it because I used to have a boss who would put me on the spot and say, how do you think
yeah.
I'm doing?
Yeah.
What
That's
do you
hard.
think?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're like, what? This has put me on the spot. And then, the time that I did answer honest, he was so defensive and angry. I was like, I'm never doing that again. So you actually give people time to think about it in writing. And then you meet with them and then they'll say, actually, thank you so much for sharing. I don't think that's your issue. I think this is it. And then what do you say in that moment? You say, thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to process this and I'll get back to you because we all can be defensive, right? So you sit with it.
Mm,
And then the third thing I would say is, once you've actually started to ask people for feedback, you have to start putting things in action. So if you feel like you have been a bad boss and you're on a journey to be a better leader, a good leader, hopefully a great one, it's in those everyday actions. It's in those everyday moments that you try to rebuild a relationship.
that coherence that you talk about in terms of either inviting coaching and
Yes.
then doing something about it is so important, because I've worked with many bosses who I think had the right intent, asked for advice, coaching, but then frankly, it was a little bit of theatre. So they did
Mm,
listen, but it was, okay, I've ticked that box in terms of engagement, and
right.
I'll tweak around the edges, but I know best. So that coherence that you talk about, all those elements you just talked through, is absolutely critical. Otherwise, you lose that integrity, and you probably won't.
Absolutely.
If you're asked again, you won't give it, or you
You won't
think,
do it.
oh gosh, they're not listening. Um, I mean, you talk. There's many, many moving. I found myself nearly crying with joy and crying with
Oh,
sadness in some of the book. I mean, it's a very emotional book in parts. And obviously, you talk about the grief of your father's passing and how you didn't handle it so well. Um, that is obviously a moment which is for a boss trying to work out, handle either their own grief or the
mm,
grief of their team members, or another very important moment in their life, which is difficult. It, for some bosses, it goes into that it's too hard.
mm.
I can't handle it. So if you were to have your time again, or if you were to advise a boss going through a very difficult, painful personal moment like that, what counsel would you offer them?
If you don't handle it, it becomes handled for you. So, what I mean by that is, I didn't deal with the grief. I buried it. I lost him so suddenly. It came out of nowhere. It was a phone call that changed my life forever from my mother. And I went back to work, and I'll never forget my boss at the time, probably 2 weeks later, saying, oh, thank God you got your mojo back. And I thought to myself, well, did I just get over the flu? No, I lost my father. So I think there's a cultural piece that happens in our workplaces where people don't want to talk about grief. Yeah, everyone's going to die. Everyone will lose someone they love, yet they don't want to talk about it. They expect people to keep moving forward. And if you can be vulnerable enough to say,
Mm,
yeah, I lost my father and I'm grieving and it's really hard. So if you are taking a grief day off, you are honoring, his birthday or Father's Day is difficult or things that you're doing to just share with your team. And you know what ended up happening, which was the unexpected gift of losing my dad, is that so many other people came forward to talk about, people that they had loved, that they had lost. And so, someone like, I lost my dad 10 years ago, but it's like, I lost him yesterday. My mother is sick. I'm caring for an elderly relative. I had a miscarriage. And so what actually happens is you start to build really strong bonds with people at work because you're sharing these things, and you share as much as you're comfortable sharing. But the more you share, what you find is when an innovation has failed, or there's some crisis or scandal, you're like, well, if I can get through losing someone, I can get through these things. We can get through these things as a team. And I also think companies need to make space for time for grieving, right? So bereavement leave is so important. Letting people, role modeling the fact that I've lost someone I love and I'm taking this time off. I think it's just so important.
There's a very human and inhumane response where, you might get a day or two
Yes.
for the most awful moment in your life. Yet if you're in that organization, well, firstly, if you worked in a high-performing, high-trust environment, you'd take the time you need.
Absolutely.
And the view would be, well, it's just the right thing to do.
No questions.
And you would trust. But a more mechanical answer would be, well, say you're working there for 5 to 10 years, like 2 or 3 or 4 days. I mean, really?
It's horrible.
But people get caught up in it. It's interesting in my own experience of grief for my son who has very significant brain damage and is severely disabled. I found the same. People came up to me with their own stories that, frankly, out of nowhere. I found it built many relationships which went through helped through business challenges as well. The trick and the skill is knowing how much to share and how much you can support them, and putting some boundaries on it, which I found at times quite difficult to do. But the positive element was I found built relationships which have lasted for years and more than years later.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. To flip the script a bit now, I mean, many organizations are at least trying to move to become more self-managed organization. That's one of the big shifts we're seeing.
Sure.
And there are, of course, bosses in those organizations right at the top, typically very strong founders, but they're trying to do away with bosses. So I'm not saying your book is irrelevant, because it's not at all. But for those organizations that are trying to become more bossless, what do you say to them?
I mean, I don't know how as a society we do that. I mean, you think about any time you've tried to make change or go after a goal, no one does it alone. And so if you have all these individuals who are self-managed, are we all just AI agents? Are we just all individual agents? Like, where are we going? Where's the ship going? Who's leading us? What's going on? Right. So I think these things swing, the pendulum swings. I also think, with the race to embrace AI and scale and automate and all of the exciting things AI brings, I hope it doesn't breed a generation of lazy bosses, because guess what happens if you actually have time in your day? Because the biggest issue, right, as you know this, as somebody who's researched and studied it as well, is that people don't have enough time in their days. Like, middle management's being squeezed. No one has enough time to teach and coach and train. But okay, now you have the technology to free up all this time. You can bring humans back, and you can actually have the time to connect with people and teach and train. And maybe in my lifetime, AI will mimic that. I still think that's what humans are here for, right? That's what we're here for.
No, I agree. I think these self-managed organizations, and I've known and worked with quite a lot of them, there are still bosses. Point one. Point two, there may be fewer of them, but it's just different because there's greater degrees of transparency, mutual accountability, higher levels of trust, and frankly, higher risk-reward trade-off than many organizations. But you still need to have the conversations about where you're going, who makes decisions. And so you may not use the word boss, but it's still very relevant. I think that's one of the myths around that sort of phenomenon. So let's just, again, I like shifting things and moving things around just to make sure we're listeners are still awake. You still are, clearly. Let's just do a quick fire round. So instead of sending midnight emails, I now ...
Sleep.
What would you answer? Sleep. Very good.
I mean, listen, am I supposed to be embarrassed that I'm sleeping at midnight? I actually think there's this whole movement for anti-hustle culture. I'm not a robot. I'm not an Uber app. I am asleep at midnight. Thank you.
I think that applies to holidays as well. And one thing I'm really struck by, and I have many American friends, North American friends, particularly American, where the holidays thing is like, they say, I'm taking a sabbatical over the summer. Oh, wonderful. How many months are you taking off? I'm taking 3 weeks. It's like, in France, that's a short holiday.
And are they taking it off? Actually, I've been guilty.
No,
I don't really take it off.
That's a different topic. So the second one is, instead of demanding FaceTime, I prioritize
Output. I prioritize output of what people are
Yeah.
working on.
Or even outcomes, I would say. But yeah,
Yes,
outcomes is a
outcomes,
great
output.
answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead of always being on, we just talked about this, I lead by
Role modeling being offline.
the last one. Instead of micromanaging, I
Do my best to get the best work out of everyone. Coach people.
wonderful, brilliant, brilliant. So let's bring it down. We're going from one picture, one situation to the other. I want to bring it back to if you're a person now who is subject to a bad boss, and it genuinely can feel awful and it can feel isolating. Imagine that person, whatever the scenario is. What are their options? What can they do?
I think number one, we go back to, is it bad in this moment for you and why? The context matters. I could also say when I was grieving the loss of my dad, I felt like I had a bad boss, right? But was it the boss or was it my emotions or what was happening with me? So I think to really understand the context, right? And again, you asked me the question of when was a boss not really bad, but was coaching and teaching you, right? So that all of that matters.
Yes.
I think number two, if it's someone who's causing a lot of hurt and harm, which I talk about in the Devil Emails at Midnight, you can't change people's behavior. You cannot outwork, outrun, outwit, try to make a toxic boss like you. Can't do it. It's their issue, not yours. And so you have to recognize that. I think then that leads me to start crafting the exit plan or exit strategy. Doesn't mean you have to leave the organization. If you have career allies, you could move internally. There are other things to do, but I find that people get stuck, and I've been there. You start the downward spiral. You start to become disengaged and angry, and then you start to infect others. I've been guilty of that.
Yeah.
And so that's
The
why number
world
three
feels
is
quite
important.
small. I find the world became smaller, even personally, in those environments where you sort of spiral down. You think, God, and then you lose sight of what you can contribute, how good you are, and you just need, frankly, often somebody who cares for you, loves you, can call it out and say, no, come on. You have some options. Let's get going. Let's start thinking and acting on it.
And sometimes you can't heal in the place that's hurt you. So if you feel like there's been too much that's happened on that team or work environment, it is best to move on, because maybe you won't be able to start a fresh new chapter, as you've talked about. You start to isolate yourself, you start to lose self-confidence, you start to wonder, why am I here? What impact I am making? And then you do become, I've been there, your performance is impacted.
Yes. I talked earlier about coherence and integrity, two words that as a strategist, I like the sound of and I like to practice as much as I can. I ask this of all authors because I'm keen to understand whether you practice what you preach. So tell me the biggest shift you've made in your own bossing behavior, that's my own made up term, since you've written the book. What have you changed in becoming a better boss since you've written the book and done all the research?
It's been a journey to just be more of a coach. I don't like the term servant leader. Because I don't like the word servant, but it is in being of service of others, to help others, to guide others. And listen, I was raised in a corporate America where I was taught, you want to get the biggest title, you want the corner glass office, you want the city view, you want to be able to look out and see all the people working for you. This is how I was raised. That was the dream, that was the goal. And the world has shifted so much. And that's not what I aspire. I want to create more good leaders. That's my job, right? My job is to make sure other people are also having the chance to serve others. And what a privilege and an honor and a responsibility is to be in charge of someone else's career, to help them.
That's a great way to frame it. Right at the beginning, I was cheeky. I like to be cheeky about your previous organizations, and I've got them here: Johnson & Johnson, Avon, Pfizer, Unilever. You're telling the stories. Of course, you're not naming them, but there will be people who go, that's me. How are you going to handle that?
Well, you missed a few. I worked at a lot of different places. But what I would say is, what's interesting?
Those are the main ones.
There's a few others, but yes, they're...
Go on then. Which other ones?
You all can go and look on my profile on LinkedIn. It's all listed. But what I would say is that I actually had someone reach out to me recently who said, I love everything you write, et cetera, et cetera. I hope I'm not one of the bad bosses you're talking about. And she's actually been a really good boss, right? So isn't that interesting? I'm actually having people reach out who have been good leaders and great bosses and are intrigued by what I'm writing. And they actually have enough self awareness to worry, and it's not them. I also, some of these people I worked for, many years ago, I hope they've all changed. And I actually think, too, if I was written in someone's book as a bad boss, I don't know if I'd recognize myself. Do I have
Yeah,
enough
that's
self
interesting.
awareness to go back
Yes.
to an experience where I managed someone 10 years ago?
Or even if they did, they might say, hey, that's not how I saw that situation. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not me. And also, there have been years, gosh, I remember one year where I had 3 different bosses, right, in that same year. So, how you remember things when people are just go, go, go and they're
Yes.
managing teams, they might not
That is
remember it the
good.
same way as I do. And that's okay.
I love the confident way you frame you answered that question, and that was wonderful. So let's just drill down a little bit more onto you as we do with all of our guests. So
Oh,
your
sure.
biggest superpower in a nutshell.
Consistency. It's underrated. Consistency and discipline. My friend said to me a while ago, people expect everything to be microwavable now in 60 seconds or less, right? If people follow me, they think, wow, what a great following. Wall Street Journal bestseller, USA Today bestseller, these writings, books, my coaching, speaking. It's consistency over years, right? People don't see what happens behind the screen. They just see sometimes the output. And so I think, particularly with social media these days, people are looking for these quick wins, and consistency and discipline has served me really well.
Hmm. Your biggest weakness?
My biggest weakness, people pleasing. I fall into that still. Yeah. I talk
Hmm.
about it a lot, but I will go back to people pleasing.
Okay.
Yeah.
At a more philosophical level, what's the impact you're looking to have on the world around you through your endeavors?
I do the work for my children. I want my kids and all of our kids to enter a different world of work than I did. And I know they will, but that's really why I do it. And I had someone read the book recently, and they said, because I've read your book, I'm now changing the way I interact with someone on my team. And that's why I wrote the book. If everyone reads it and thinks about one way they can show up positively in the workplace, then it's been a success.
And your own philosophy to leadership and your own leadership practice, how would you describe the philosophy and the practice in particular?
I would go back to, I think about being who I needed when I was younger. I can talk a lot about the bad bosses I had, but can I be the person I needed when I was younger? And again, I go into coach mode. I'm not athletically inclined. I can run fast and that's about it. But I love how sports teams operate. And I think about, you don't kick people when someone's down, you help them up. You don't point out, oh, that was stupid. What a stupid mistake. You actually help teach them what they did, right? So, like, all of those things. How do you teach people, coach people, inspire confidence, get them to believe in themselves when sometimes they don't believe yet, but you see
Yeah.
something in them? And I've had bosses who've seen something in me and I didn't see it yet in myself. And so those are the things I like to think about when I'm leading
I love
teams.
that. I love that. You talked about consistency and discipline as being your superpowers. You agreed you took two, although they're related. I'll give you that. He says cheekily. When you are having your best day, you're smashing it out of the park, everything's flowing. It's like, oh God, I'm working brilliantly. What practices, or I should say habits, help you the most in terms of fueling you to do that great work?
I get a good night's sleep. I'm eating well. I'm going out in nature, which I never used to do, but I do a lot more now, even if it's like a 20-minute walk. I am detoxing digitally, and I'm just finding times of moments of inspiration to work. I think if you're constantly online, it's really hard to actually be inspired and be creative. You have to find moments to be offline, back in the world, meeting people,
In the real
reading,
world, yeah.
walking in silence, right? To
Yes.
be then inspired when you're sitting in front of your laptop trying to do work. And I have bad
Yeah.
days too. We all do. And you sort of,
Yeah.
have my pint of Ben and Jerry's, feel sorry for myself, move on, and there's another day.
I love that pint. It's interesting because a pint in the UK means often an
Oh,
alcoholic beverage.
yeah.
Um, but I love it. And in the US, it's sort of a pint of ice cream. It's
Yes,
wonderful.
it is.
One of
It
my
is.
favorites.
Yeah.
So as we draw to a close, if you are speaking with our listeners directly in their sort of parting comment, whether there are a boss, a bad boss, or somebody living with a bad boss, what final remarks would you share with them?
I really hope we can all look in the mirror and think about what's one behavior we'd like to change. I'm not telling you to think about 10, but what's one behavior that you want to work on? And all of these behaviors, we can go from being good to bad and bad to good if they actually swing in one way or the other. And so that's what I would have you think about. And then to share it with someone that you're working on this. It could be at work or it could be at home, but that you're working on this behavior and you want them to help you and to help you be accountable and to do better and be better.
Wonderful. You have a huge following, saying it's all down to consistency and discipline. So down to a lot of other things I know as well. So people will know where you are online. But for those one or two people who live in Antarctica who haven't seen you online, where can they find you?
Oh, you're too kind. LinkedIn, I love meeting people there. You can also find me on mitamallick.com. And I hope you'll check out the book, The Devil Emails at Midnight, What Good Leaders Can Learn from Bad Bosses, Amazon or your local independent bookstore. Thank you so much.
And you did a brilliant job of infusing the title of your book into this podcast throughout. I thought that was very, very clever. But it's been a wonderful conversation. I think
Thank you so much.
It's so real. It's grounded. You share your own personal stories, reflections. You then flip it to, okay, so what can you do better? It's funny. It's sad. And it's real and it's practical and people can immediately use it. So I commend the work. I commend you for doing it. And I thank you for the conversation. And that was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please do check out the other episodes in the series. Sign up to the YouTube channel, to the podcast. And if you are feeling generous, especially if you're a boss, give us a 5-star rating as you do so. And Mita, thank you ever so much again.
Thank you very much.